Welcome, everyone, to this very exciting edition of the Maza's Musings podcast. Yes, exciting. This is the Get Excited episode of the Maza's Musings podcast, and that's because there's a lot of great announcements and great additions that are coming not only to the New England Patriots, but to Disney parks as well. And we are going to try to get through all of this information. There's a lot to get through. And of course, every time that we have our good friend Greg Cameron on the podcast, things tend to go a little long. It's not a bad thing. It's just what happens every time. So we're going to motor right on through this stuff. But of course, it's always important that we take time, regardless of what we're doing, to make sure that we are smiling and we are laughing. So with that in mind, here is Meghan's Joke of the Week. All right, do you have a joke?
Yes. What do snowmen eat for breakfast?
I don't know. What do snowmen eat for breakfast?
Snowflakes.
All right, well, once again, Meghan coming through with a gem. And I got to tell you, what we've got coming up next has quite a few gems involved. It is going through some of the new additions and new news about the new additions at Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the other Disney parks just in general. There's some really great information, and why should I keep building it up? I'm just going to give it to you. So here we go with today's Maza's Mickey Minute, which is admittedly going to be much longer than 1 minute.
Donald, wake up! It's showtime! Don't forget the orchestra!
Ah, there you are. And just in time.
Mom says there's even more magical stuff now.
For those of you standing, please hold on to the handrails throughout our journey and stay clear of the doors.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, because this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
And here we go!
Well, there was certainly plenty to be excited about following the Future of World Building at Disney panel from the South by Southwest, which took place in Texas. And we're going to get into everything that Disney Experiences chairman Josh D'Amaro and Disney Entertainment co-chair Alex Bergman had to say, or Bergman, excuse me, everything that they had to say about this. But I feel like I need to get in the proper mindset for this, so I'm going to switch headgear now. And I am going to go to the Dale ears, which, if you listen to a prior podcast, I was really excited about these because, man, one of my low-key favorite characters. But anyway, we'll get right into this. Now, the important thing here with all of these announcements is that these are things that are in production. We're not talking blue sky concepts here. This is real life, folks. All right. And first and foremost on my mind is we got very cool and exciting look at the mechanics of the new Monsters, Inc. roller coaster at Walt Disney World's Hollywood Studios, and specifically that loading area. We already knew that this was going to be the first suspended coaster for Disney, but it's also going to be its first vertical lift. Yeah, they're actually going to, if you see the videos about this, they're actually going to load you on the vehicles, pick you straight up, and then shoot you into the door vault. It looks very cool. They also pulled the curtain back a bit on the new Cars attraction coming to Magic Kingdom. Now, according to the Disney Parks blog, Imagineer Michael Hungen, these names are killing me, Hungen said, quote, "We need to invent a new type of ride vehicle." Now, the article goes on to say the team took a trip out to Arizona, to the Arizona desert, to jump in a real off-road vehicle to see what it felt like driving over the rocky terrain. These are all things Lightning McQueen and Mater haven't experienced before, like racing over rocky terrain, ascending mountain peaks, and dodging around geysers. how do you take those real world elements and put a car's spin on it? From there, the Imagineers worked with a motocross company to build a real dirt track to race around, and took that data back to begin work on creating how the ride vehicles will eventually move and race. And of course, there's some really cool Star Wars news that came out of this as well. Again, from the Disney Parks blog, a new adventure is on the horizon for the Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run. With the release of The Mandalorian and Grogu in theaters on Memorial Day weekend 2026, you'll get to embark on a new mission that will make you feel like you're right alongside the daring hero and youngling. Now, the new scenes are going to include Tatooine, the Cloud City on Bespin, and the wreckage from the second Death Star near the forest moon of Endor. Also, the BDX droids, which have been at Disneyland already, will be joining at Walt Disney World, Tokyo Disneyland, and Disneyland Paris. Speaking of Disneyland, for those of you who are interested in stuff happening there, Robert Downey Jr., who we know now as Tony Stark, but will soon be known as Dr. Doom, surprised the audience and helped present new information on Stark Flight Lab and Avengers Infinity Defense. Now, in the Flight Lab, according to the Disney Parks blog, guests will sit in gyrokinetic pods and roll along on a track before stopping in front of a giant robot arm. This robot arm will hoist you in the air while you're making several high-speed maneuvers inspired by Iron Man and some other Avengers. For the Infinity Defense, you'll quote, assemble with the Avengers and battle King Thanos across multiple worlds. Join alongside the likes of Black Panther, Ant-Man, Hulk, and so many other favorites to save the universe again. Now, heading back to Walt Disney World, we also got another peek at the new nighttime parade, which is called Disney Starlight, Dream the Night Away. And the new poster, which is available on the Disney Parks blog, features Elsa, Cinderella, Coco, Moana, the Blue Fairy from Pinocchio, and Peter Pan and Wendy. Now, we also got some new art for the Coco float that will be part of that show. Of course, Miguel will be there with his guitar. As the Disney Parks blog describes it, he's at the foot of the Marigold Bridge to the Land of the Dead, complete with sugar skull fireworks. And to top it all off is Pepita, Mama Imelda's, I can never say it, the spirit creature with the name that I cannot say. Alubreje? I'm sorry. The Madrigals from Encanto will also be there with Isabella, making her Magic Kingdom debut, swinging on floral vines. Moana's float will feature, quote, gorgeous luminescent waves, as well as Pua, Heihei, and Grandma Tala's manta ray. And there will be a new princess float featuring Aurora, Prince Philip, Tiana and Prince Naveen, Belle and the Beast, and Cinderella and Prince Charming. And some other very cool Disney news. The legendary Disney Imagineer Bob Gurr, who designed so many vehicles for so many Disneyland attractions, including the monorail, the Matterhorn bobsleds, the Haunted Mansion, he's going to be the subject of a feature-length documentary, which is set to premiere in Los Angeles on April 26th. In the meantime, Bob was featured in the most recent installment of Disney's YouTube series, We Call It Imagineering, where you can also see some of the things that I was talking about earlier with the rides and the developments of these new rides that they're coming up with. It's about 20 minutes, and it's 20 minutes well spent. I mean, especially the last part really kind of choked me up. So I highly recommend it. And you know what else I recommend? That's letting We Do Travel Right take care of your next vacation. That's right. We Do Travel Right has that concierge level service that you can only get from their one-on-one agent assistance. They also have the dining team, which will help you with all of those dining reservations. Especially, are you looking for that special character dining? They can help you get that. They also can help you with all the ins and outs of the parks, the ins and outs of the My Disney Experience app, or the Disneyland app, or the cruise line app. They help simplify all of this for you so that you can just enjoy your vacation. And it's not only for Disney. They also work with Universal. They work with all inclusives. They work with other cruise lines. And they do all this for free. That's right. You do not pay anything extra. And you know why? That's because all of these places already build the use of an agent into their pricing. So you're paying for the agent, whether you use the agent or not. So doesn't it just make sense to use the agent? Eileen and I have talked about it. We used to think, oh, well, we're Disney people. We know what we're doing. We don't need the help. And now we can't imagine doing a trip without them. So if you are interested in a free, obligation-free quote, then go to wedotravelright.com/Maza. That's wedotravelright.com/MAZA and get your next magical vacation started today.
Well, I can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand.
So long, partner.
See you real soon.
Well, it's going to be a little bit longer than we'd like, Mickey, unfortunately. We are going to be going on a cruise, though, next year. And we are, of course, using We Do Travel Right to help us out with that. But in the meantime, we are cruising ever so quickly towards the NFL draft. And of course, before the NFL draft is the start of NFL free agency. And we have a lot to get through. So I'm switching headgear again. And we are going to get right into our discussion with Greg Cameron on what's happened so far in the first few days of free agency and what's yet to come. All right, everyone, welcome to this start of the offseason that really started off with a bang for the New England Patriots. And I'd like to welcome in Greg Cameron once again. Thank you for joining us. It's always great to have you on to talk some sports. And it seems like this might be the first time in a while that we have a discussion about New England that just doesn't have this feeling of dread to it.
Well, for the Patriots, certainly. And thank you for having me, Chris. I greatly appreciate you asking me on here. As the title of this pod, as this live stream would suggest, oh yeah, the Dynasty's back on, baby.
So I thought that we would take a look at how this thing has all kind of unraveled for the Patriots in the early days of this offseason and the free agent cycle, kind of get our initial impressions, then go through each of the signings so far. And as you said, you're going to kind of monitor things and wave at me if anything changes.
I do have the insiders on right now. I forget who the reporter is here, but if I do see something, if I see Ian Rappaport wave and I see a Patriots logo, I am going to do the exact same thing. I am going to bite Rap Sheet style. It's perfectly fine. So hopefully our viewers here and on YouTube will at least get a chance to get some breaking news, but hopefully we don't have to break things too crazy so we don't go as far over as we normally do for our draft pods.
Well, yes, we're going to kind of let some people, relax a little bit. We're not going to have any 4-hour marathons here, so everybody can take a deep breath and understand that we're not biting off that today. But I did want to start off with just some of our initial impressions. And I hope that you'll let me kind of take the floor here for a minute, and then I'll give you an opportunity to kind of give your initial impressions. Then we'll kind of run through the list, and then I'd like to kind of wrap it up with how this approach impacts what we think they're going to do with the draft. Not a draft, not a mock draft, but just kind of seeing how this maybe impacts their approach and what they might prioritize in the draft. Because there's still a lot that they can do with the draft.
Oh, totally. I think what they've done so far opens up so many different doors for them. It doesn't necessarily pigeonhole them into necessarily taking Will Campbell at 4 or taking Travis Hunter or Tet McMillan. They can do a bunch of different things at this point, and I think the last couple of days have been actually pretty exciting for the New England Patriots.
Yeah,
I'll let you have the floor. It's your house.
So I'd agree with that. I think that this, some people were a little worried that this was a lot like, 2021. This feels different to me, mainly in that year. I felt like the Patriots were doing a lot of bidding against themselves, that offseason, they were one of the few teams that was really flush with cap space. I took a look back, and there were 4 teams that had more than $50 million in cap space that year. One of them was Jacksonville, who had just fired Doug Marrone and hired Urban Meyer. The Jets, who had just fired Adam Gase and hired Robert Saleh. And Indianapolis.
Was Frank Reich still the coach there at that point?
Frank Reich was the coach. Yeah.
Was that his second year? Second or third?
I think it might have been his second year.
Okay.
Timelines kind of blur as I age, and
especially with failed coaches like Frank Reich. Yeah.
But on top of that, there were 8 teams that were over the cap heading into that offseason. And New Orleans was like $40 million over the cap. And LA, the Rams, were more than $30 million over. And Philly was $28 million over. So there was like there weren't a lot of big players heading into free agency. Whereas this year, now the Patriots had like $120 million in cap space, but they were one of 4 teams with more than $70 million in cap space and one of 12 with more than $50 million. So there are a lot more players in here. And a lot of those teams are teams that had good situations. Like you're talking Detroit had a lot of cap space. Washington, Minnesota, you could say has some promise. Even the Chargers, these are teams that are all, that have some cap space and could be players in heading into this free agency. So with all that said, I think that the Patriots did, I won't say that this was a home run. This was a grand slam, dynasty back on, but we're on the right track. This is the first time in a while that we felt encouraged by the start of an offseason. And yes, they paid some suck tax. They paid a premium on some guys that maybe they wouldn't have had to in the past. And I think defensively, they did what they had to do. There are some guys who are not necessarily like superstars, but they're needle movers that they added to this team. And when you look at it as the whole, as opposed to just the parts, when you see how it all fits together, it looks really promising. It actually feels like there is a vision. Even in 2021, it felt like they were just throwing money at what they felt were the best available players, and they were going to figure out how it fit later.
Yeah, and I think probably the best example of that is there isn't necessarily a like a double dip anywhere that feels like, oh, this guy feels a little superfluous. I sort of felt like when in 21 when they had signed Jonnu Smith after signing Hunter Henry minutes earlier, like I didn't feel that with anybody here. Like I don't think Tonga is superfluous because they've signed Milton Williams or anything like that. Like I think that they've just done. I think where we kind of could and should start with a lot of these guys is what the Patriots have done. And I think I told you this as we were talking. I said this to my buddy Matisse Bauman, who works for the Patriots, as we've kind of been talking Patriots stuff all week. Is that the Patriots have gone out and signed quality humans. It's not to say that they had poor character concerns the last couple of years, but I think just to sort of reshape and restart the culture, like you get some
they had a few character concerns.
I mean, Jelani Tavai certainly had a rough end of the year, certainly when it came to culture and kind of interactions with fans. But I feel like the guys that they've signed are all quality humans. And I think that for me has been my big takeaway. These are guys who are very good at their positions, but they're even better people than they are football players.
Yeah, I think that, as good as this is, we've seen that there are still some obvious holes. Now, you're not going to fill everything in the offseason, but you can see from reports they went hard after Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin decided to stay in Tampa Bay. They went hard after, and, some sensationalist headlines say that they illegally tampered with Ronnie Stanley. I believe that was Nesson.com. Shame on you guys. That's not what, if you actually read the story, what happened.
And hey, now they're ceasing editorial operations next month, so
yeah,
who knows what that could have stemmed from? But I digress.
Fair enough. But these are guys that they went hard after who opted to stay where they are and take less money to stay where they are. So, money does not necessarily cure all. And, you look at, especially, honestly, for me, the line is still the biggest thing that needs to be addressed. I understand people wanting the receiver, and we'll get into that a little bit. But to me, the receiver is always like something like that is the finishing piece. There's still a lot of work to be done on this line. They've basically, theoretically, the right side is shored up now. But basically from center on left, there are a lot of questions.
Tons.
So, I think that there's still work to be done. I think that there is the opportunity to shore up some of those things and have as few questions as possible. But I think that defensively, they're in a great spot. You can see what's happening. And offensively, while you hate to see another year where this is what's going to be happening with Drake May, they may just still be figuring it out.
Yeah. But also at the same point, like I had thought about sort of where the receiving room is, and specifically with Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, who, let's be honest, they had Alex Van Pelt as their offensive coordinator, kind of showing them what to do, who wasn't necessarily calling plays all that much prior to New England. Well, now Josh McDaniels is in here. And Josh McDaniels certainly knows how to coordinate the hell out of an offense, and especially wide receivers. Like in my head, if like the lowest possible ceiling, I feel like for like Jalen Polk is Jabbar Gaffney, like that kind of a guy, like a speedier guy, a smaller guy who just sort of works within the middle of the field and can stretch it a little bit. But I feel like under the tutelage of McDaniels, this offense is going to look completely different. We don't even know what it's going to look like after all of the traveling around that McDaniels did in the offseason, going to Ohio State and going to a bunch of these different teams to learn new concepts and to infuse them into an offense. We don't even know what it's going to be yet.
Sure, that's fair.
And I wonder, because I think about sort of the receivers who are still out there. I mean, Cooper Kupp just got onto the market today, and I'd love to see him here, but who knows if he wants to just keep his own championship window open. I don't know that coming here is necessarily a high priority for him. But then when you see what else is left out there for wide receivers on the open market, I don't know. I think you kind of just either draft a couple of guys or you just kind of figure out if there's a low risk guy that you can sign. I mean, they brought in Mac Hollins, who wild dude, absolutely wild dude. Seems like a good dude, but wild dude, like calls shoes toe prisons. Actual quote. He's also football's the most interesting man. He's got a TikTok that shows you like life hacks. I think I had sent one to Annie at one point. We had watched a Bills game during the playoffs, and she's like, wait, there's a guy who's barefoot? Oh, yeah. Mac Hollins doesn't wear shoes walking into the stadium, but then also does like TikToks about how to fold a fitted sheet, which even after Mac Hollins did his best to teach me how to fold a fitted sheet, I don't. But
I need to find that TikTok.
I will absolutely send it to you after we hang up here. Because again, he just seems like a good dude, but like, I don't know, is his ceiling 700 yards, 800 yards like Brandon Lloyd numbers? Okay, but I don't know. I think they were trying to get good people in here to sort of build a culture first in positions like wide receiver.
All right, so let's kind of work through some of these, and I'm actually going to start. This actually happened before free agency, before the legal tampering period. He didn't qualify for all of that because he was released, and that's Harold Landry. 3 years, $43.5 million, 26 of that guaranteed. Now, with all of these, we are going to put the qualifier on it that structure matters, and we don't know what the
Yes,
structure of all of this is.
we don't.
I'm less concerned with the money because it's not my money and the
Yeah,
cap isn't a concern. So, that's less of an issue for me as much as, sometimes the structure will tell you if a 3-year deal is actually a 1-year deal with a, couple of dead years, or if it's, something that the guy might be playing out. So we'll start with Harold Landry. And this is kind of a guy that I think they've been looking for. Now, I don't think that he's a guy. I don't think that he necessarily has the juice that he had coming into the league. He's not necessarily individual game wrecker, but I think that in terms of the pass rush, with some of the other pieces that they're bringing in, the pieces that they have, he could be a great finisher. The guy who cleans it up, which is something that they didn't even have that.
no,
I mean, how many
no.
of their sacks last year came in that one game against Chicago, which was maybe and I mean, as a Patriots fan, I'm saying this, that might have been the worst offensive line performance I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
so just having somebody who can clean that stuff up and still be able to be on the field and defend the run, I think is something that's really important and something that they've lacked. Even you talk about Judon. Judon, I'm not going to say he was a liability against the run, but he wasn't a guy that you're going to look at and say, that's a guy who, who's really good at defending the run. And Landry is a guy who's good at defending the run.
I think on the edge too, they needed well-rounded guys to sort of show their young guys good habits and good technique. And like I sort of look at the Harold Landry signing as, oh, this is the Keon White whisperer. Like, this is the guy to sort of teach Keon White, like, this is what you do in the NFL. This is how you comport yourself. This is how you do things on a snap to snap basis. This is how you sort of hold yourself to account. And I feel like they needed a guy who's been around and done things on that defensive line, because they're all fairly younger guys. And even as much as I love Dietrich Wise, you're never going to find a bigger Dietrich Wise guy than I love him. He's a great dude, great player, but he hasn't really done anything in the league. So they needed somebody who has some gravitas in that locker room. And I think getting Harold Landry to start their free agency this offseason is a good place to start. He's a good building block. He's, I think, for sure going to be a captain on that defense. Like, for sure.
I think that when you've mentioned somebody to, like, take the young guys under their wings, I'm looking at, the guys who do what he does necessarily. There aren't a lot of young guys on this team who do that. I have some thoughts on where Keon White fits in with all of this. I almost see him being more of that third inside rusher. I see him in this defense,
the Ty Warren type,
more of and having more of that kind of role that doesn't necessarily, I don't think we're going to see him standing up a lot, and so
no.
I think that it's valuable to so I don't think that Harold Landry or the existence of Keon White, or if Dietrich Wise comes back, I think he's a free agent, correct?
Oh, he might be. Yeah.
I think he's a free agent. I don't think any of that precludes them from taking one of these young guys in the draft as well.
No.
I think that could be kind of like, given the length of this deal and depending on how it's structured, this could be one of those things where they're doing what the Patriots under Bill Belichick did for a long time, is they had the established guy and then they set up the succession plan. And that's where they got in trouble, was they got away from that and started scrambling for needs or creating needs that with Shaq Mason, we won't get into all of that, but you know, when they created that talent pipeline, which was not only for the coaching, we hear about that with the coaching a lot. It was also a structure that they had, in terms of the talent on the
player
field.
development.
Yeah. I think that is something that could very easily happen. I don't think that Landry's presence stops them from using a top 100 pick on the edge.
No, I don't think that stops them from getting a Mike Green or a Shamar Stewart, or name your second round edge guy here, Devin Iziraku from Boston College. Some of these guys, that are in this draft. Like, it's an interesting draft, certainly for the needs that they have left too. It's very strong in the trenches, I think. But we can continue with our free agency because we've only talked about the first guy.
Okay. Sorry. All right. So next one that I've got on the list is linebacker Robert Spillane, 3 years, $37 million. This is probably my favorite player that they've signed. The deal may be a little rich. This may be one of those sucktacks, that they blew him out of the water because they liked him that much. But this is just a guy. He's active. He's great. He's good against the run. He's a good open field tackler. I mean, really, the linebacker play just in general was terrible. And part of that was they were playing guys out of position. Jelani Tavai was a guy who hadn't played well, in that inside role, and then got brought here and they moved him outside and he played well, but then he had to move inside. And so he was back in the situation that everybody had him labeled as a bust in the first place. So but there are a lot of guys who just did not, there was very, very little depth behind
Juwan Bentley.
Thank you. And then once he was gone, it exposed them. Now, I think that in this defense, there's a very real possibility that Spillane and Bentley are next to each other and complement each other.
I agree.
I mean, and one of the things that I love about Spillane too is he's not necessarily a cover linebacker, but that's a guy who, I watched some clips that some people like Taylor Kynes put out there. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with pronouncing
it's all
names.
Good.
That's why I write. But basically, there's a lot of these instances where, especially if he's dropping into a zone and the pass gets dumped over the middle, the guy catches the ball, makes a turn, bam, there's Robert Spillane just like cleaning it up. And that guy's going to think twice the next time he does that, and it's just, I love the motor. He's one of those guys who plays with his hair on fire. And I think it speaks volumes that they offered him what they offered him. And I love a guy who was an undrafted guy who worked his way up to having over 100 tackles a season.
He's exactly the kind of guy that they needed. They needed somebody to be sort of that middle linebacker with Bentley, and in place of Bentley in case Bentley gets hurt like he has the last couple of years. And I don't think that he's it's not a sexy signing. It's not flashy by any means. He's just a good football player who does what he does, and it fills an area of need for the Patriots. And I think he's one of those signings that when you first see it, you're like, oh, okay, I think I kind of know who this guy is. And then you look at the clips and you look at the game film and you're like, okay, no, perfect. The Patriots need a guy like this. Because I can just think of the last several years, because it was Bentley got hurt week 2, week 3 this past year, and it's sort of just like there was absolutely zilch in coverage in the middle of part of that defense that the Patriots had with any remote success, when they just need they need a guy who can just you can put out there and you don't have to worry about. And that for me, that's Robert Spillane. He's just out there doing his thing, and you don't have to worry about it. It's been a long time since the Patriots have had linebackers like that who stay healthy in the middle of that defense. You're just like, all right, no, he's got it. Don't worry about it. Like, it's fine. We can worry somewhere else on defense.
Honestly, it's he was much older, at the time when he came to the Patriots, but he's the Junior Seau kind of energy guy, except he'll actually make a tackle and not just be around it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I think that's such a good thing for them, that they needed a guy who does the work, who puts in the work, and and shows up on the stat sheet compared to just being just like, oh, this guy's here for vibes and he'll hang around a little bit.
Right.
Like Spillane seems like he does the work, and that's Patriots need that in the middle of this defense.
All right, so sticking with the defense, we're going to go to cornerback Carlton Davis. 3 years, $60 million, 34.5 of it is guaranteed. To me, it's not a perfect comparison, but this is the Patriots comparison that I've come up with. It's really kind of the Revis Browner approach, except Davis might be a little bit more athletic than Browner was at the point in his career when he was here. But it's that idea where you have the lockdown guy, and then you have another guy who's going to get physical at the line. He's going to be good in in man coverage, and really you're creating that tandem that's going to make it a lot easier for your pass rush to get home. You're creating the opportunity for some more coverage sacks, and it really kind of like slides everybody else in the secondary back into positions where they should be. Because you think about the number of guys that they had who were, what was it? Marcus Jones was going up against Mike Williams one week or something stupid like that. So it's nice that they've got a guy who's got some length and, and that you can lock in on the outside, and it kind of makes everything else fit together on that back end.
And what I love about Carlton Davis too, like I think your Revis Browner comparison for he and Gonzalez on the boundary corners is spot on. What I love about Carlton Davis is he's not necessarily like this ball hawk, but he's physical and out there. He's mean. And like I read a piece that I think I had shared with you, and the headline that I saw on the tweet or the skeet on Blue Sky was Carlton Davis is a badass. Excuse my French, but like they've just needed another corner opposite Gonzalez, who's a little bit of a junkyard dog. And as much as I love Jonathan Jones, who I'm sure we'll talk about because now that he's in Washington, is Jonathan Jones was never that guy. Just was never that guy who's just this mean SOB that you've got to go up against on the boundary. And I think them having a guy who has that in his kind of football DNA is only a good is only a good thing for this team. And I think an awesome thing for a guy like Gonzalez who seems like he's quiet and sort of this quiet assassin out there. Whereas I think the fact that they have somebody who's got bark and bite is such a good thing for their secondary. And I think that means too, you brought up Marcus Jones. I think now that this means Marcus Jones can be that star corner in the slot, which is where he should be. He shouldn't be defending the Mike Williamses in these the Mike Williamses, Jamar Chases, T Higginses on the opposite side of the ball. You can't be putting these like water bugs on these huge receivers. And I think having a guy with Carlton Davis's length along with Gonzo's length can only mean good things for Marcus Jones being able to be kind of the small, shifty guy in the slot.
So one thing you mentioned Jamar Chase. One thing that I heard, and I can't remember who he was talking to, but Jamar Chase was asked essentially who the toughest corner was that he went against, and he said it was Carlton Davis. Because he said on top of everything else, you don't necessarily appreciate his length until you're going up against him. So, I think that there are a lot of guys in the NFC or in the AFC East who are going to be really, understanding what it is to be dealing with a couple of guys who are going to be contesting catches on the outside, New England. So I think that that's a great step for that back end. Now, if they can get somebody over the top, to get somebody who has more of that free safety kind of pedigree,
Mm-hmm.
that would really kind of complete things as far as I'm concerned. Because even outside of that, on the outside, you've got a little bit of depth. Alex Austin has shown that he can do a thing or two in a pinch.
Yeah.
And if you need a guy on the inside too, you've got Bolden, who is that bigger kind of slot. So you do have some options that you can play around with when you have your boundary covered.
I feel like of the guys who benefit a lot from the Carlton Davis signing, the first guy I thought of who's already here, other than Jones, is Alex Austin. I think Alex Austin, by all accounts, has been just good dude in the locker room, like really studying hard, really kind of getting down to it with with that defense. I feel like him just being able to learn from a guy who has a Super Bowl ring and has this pedigree of being a guy that the Jamar Chases of the world don't like going up against. I feel like for these young corners that they have, it can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
And Austin was a guy too that I loved towards the stretch. Like he was one of those guys when I would see him out there, I was like, all right, he's competent. He knows what he's doing. And there weren't many times with the secondary this past season where I was like, oh, okay, that guy's out there.
So do you want to stick with defense or, because I've got the list, and basically the list I think was in the order in which they signed. But
I'm willing to go chronological if you want to. I'm willing to go chronological, or because I mean, there is a pretty big guy we can talk about.
I was going to say I like. Oh, you're talking about Kairos Tonga, right?
No, but I love Kairos Tonga.
You're talking about a big guy, but all right. So we'll stick with defense, and we'll go with the guy that you're referring to, the crown jewel, so to speak, of this class so far. Defensive tackle Milton Williams, 4 years, $104 million. Gonna say it again. Structure matters here. I didn't even see anything on how much is guaranteed, whereas you've seen that with some of these other guys. Yeah. I think this is another look. This was one of those. He was going elsewhere. He was going elsewhere.
Carolina,
and then they upped their offer, and they said, hey, before you sign, hear us out. And so yes, there was an overpay, I think, a little bit here, but again, I don't care so much about somebody else's money, especially when it doesn't have a big cap impact this year or really next year either. I mean, they've got flexibility for the next couple of years as far as the cap goes, and the cap keeps going up. We're past the COVID pause, and now it's just exponentially growing again. So I'm not so worried about the money. My one question always with a guy like this who hasn't been the focus of either the defense or the offense is, can he do it himself? He was on a really good defensive front there.
Sure was.
I hope, and I just hope that we're not getting too wrapped up in the recency bias here after what was a terrific postseason, especially. But so we're not talking about Coney Ely, who had a great Super Bowl and then nobody heard from him again. But it is one of those things where I'm looking at it, I'm just like, okay, this is a guy who, in the structure of what I think they're going to do, could do really well. You're kind of hoping that Christian Barmore is next to him, and then one of them's got to draw a double team, which will theoretically get the other guy open. And then if you've got Landry coming off the edge, and you've got a guy like Keon White, who's also in that mix, sending Spillane on a blitz now and then, it creates options. And so it's, again, one of those things where I'm hoping that the sum is greater than the parts, so to speak.
I will tell you, I love the idea of Milton Williams on this team. they just needed a mauler in the middle of that defensive line, with Barmore's health being in huge question. And you hope that he, takes care of his health and is healthy, and everything is kind of all systems are go this summer. When I saw the list of free agency kind of targets, Milton Williams is always at the top of my list of like, all right, this is a guy who's been in this system, who knows what it's like to be around winners and to have won and has won like he did this past season with the Eagles. They needed a guy who's been there before. And I think him coming over here and only being 26, he's young. Yeah. He's still young. There's a lot of mileage left on that tire. I at first really liked the acquisition. And I'll tell you what really drove it home for me. What really drove it home for me was my uncle, Steve Cameron, who is a Philadelphia Eagles season ticket holder down in beautiful Lansdale, Pennsylvania. He is the king of the tailgate down there at the link. He sent me a text message on after the Patriots had signed Milton Williams, and the text, I'll read it to you here, was Milton Williams to the Patriots, you will like him. And this is a guy who's seen his fair share of players kind of come and go through the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think he wouldn't have texted that if Milton Williams sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that seems like a guy who's just like, if that was a guy we could have kept, that would have been a great guy to keep. And I think, and I keep kind of coming back to what Terrell Williams was saying about what types of players they want on this defense. He wants guys who are violent players and aggressive players. And I feel like just that violent and aggressive style of play, that's Milton Williams. That was Milton Williams this entire postseason. He was a game wrecker and just absolutely made Patrick Mahomes' life a living hell in the Super Bowl. And I feel like the Patriots they need guys who have that pedigree and have that experience, and Milton Williams has it in spades now.
Well, I think one thing, to a couple of things, is we've talked about Barmore. The presence of Milton Williams means that they don't necessarily have to rely on Barmore quite the way that, like last year, we were giddy to get him back because it was just like it's some talent there, and he clearly wasn't back even before he was experiencing symptoms again. He just wasn't the same guy. He didn't have the power. He didn't so it does give you a little bit of time, and especially, depending on how it all works out. I know I keep coming back to Keon White, but I think that especially Keon White's a guy who can put a guard, on his back or go around him one way or the other to get more of that inside pressure. So that, a couple of those things really make it easier to kind of ease Barmore back in. And then, once presumably he's healthy and back at the height of his powers, then, you've got that tandem that really, really works well. And you mentioned, the violence and the aggressiveness. One thing that I can say about all of these guys is, they're athletes. I mean, Carlton Davis isn't necessarily a speedster on the outside, but he's an athlete. He's a guy who he's a physical athlete. So, I guess the outlier there, and it's funny that he's the outlier, is Harold Landry, who's not, who was an athlete coming out of the combine, but he's had the knee injury and he's had some injuries over the years, so he's not that guy anymore. But you're seeing that there are certain qualities with these guys that they're looking for, and so that's why I said off the top that you can see that there's a program, there's a structure that they're looking at, and you look at these guys and you're just like, yeah, there it is.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that certainly the past couple of Patriots teams have lacked, of kind of these guys who are athletic and are able to, especially on defense. Like these defenses, certainly last year, lacked quite a bit in the category of athleticism, and I think they needed guys who weren't necessarily fast, but guys who moved well enough to do what they needed to do. Not to harken back to the Bill Belichick "do your job" kind of mantra, but like, there were guys that were playing on this defense a year ago that certainly didn't have the tools necessary to do their jobs, whether that's coaching or whether that's a lack of talent or a lack of skill set. I feel like just bringing in a guy who is as physically gifted and just as large of a human as Milton Williams is, you don't have to worry about him all that much in terms of, what he's got to do. It's Milton, your job is to go from the line of scrimmage forward. And if you knock a couple guys on their keisters as you do it, all the better.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just looking more large scale at this defense, and you look at guys even like a Jennings, and he complements what some of these other guys do. So you don't necessarily have you don't have guys who are overlapping in terms of their skill sets.
No.
Their skill sets that complement each other, and honestly, they're two different kinds of players. Landry on one side, is one kind of run defender, whereas Jennings on the other side is just like that classic edge setter. Landry's more the guy who's going to get in the backfield and occasionally take the guy down from behind. He'll be able to pursue a little bit more, but that helps if you're running to one side and Jennings is there walling things off, and then everybody can rally from the other side. So I just love the way that they are kind of putting complementary pieces together. You hear a lot about complementary football with the different phases, but it also works in terms of who's on your team, what your personnel is, and how you're scheming it. So I think that they have brought in pieces that fit. And that was, again, 2021, you had a lot of pieces that then you were done hoping to fit together. This feels like there's much more of a schematic that they are finding the pieces, finding the tools that are going to get the job done.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that what they've done on defense thus far, I think the word you used, complementary, is the exact right way to describe it. They filled the holes that they needed to fill, but they also filled them with guys who fit with the personnel that they already have. Would I love them to get another edge guy? Definitely. But they could probably get an edge guy who fits what they want to do better, probably in the draft. I haven't looked at an up-to-date list of who's still available at kind of each position group, certainly in the hour or two after work and before we started potting, but I just sort of wonder, I feel like what they've done defensively, they can get more complementary pieces next month in the draft. They've set themselves up so well.
Yeah, and the last piece that we have is Kyrie's Tonga, which we talked about. It's a 1 year, $2.7 million deal. This to me was just they took Gotcha, which by the way, now I need to change my my fantasy football team's name. You
do.
I gotta say, Gotcha Where I Want You, it was pretty good. It's pretty good.
Look, anytime you can reference the 1998 hit by The Flies, Gotcha Where I Want You, I love it. Chef's kiss. But I feel like you might have to go, brief digression here, you might have to go Office Space with Milton Williams and a red stapler somewhere. But talking about Tonga, and there's kind of the old adage of you can't teach speed, you can't teach being a massive human. Tonga is ginormous.
Really? Because I seem to have learned that pretty well. I'm getting there.
I've gotten that way with vitamin B pretty easily. But I had a buddy of mine at work had texted me and was like, "Hey, you got Tonga, he's just ginormous." And it was one of these where I had texted him back and I was like, "Oh yeah, he's a huge guy." I don't know if you recall though, he was a guy that you and I put in mock drafts. What was his draft year? Was his draft year 21 or 20?
Somewhere around there. I mean, he's hitting free agency, so yeah,
20 or 21, probably 21.
Probably 21.
You and I mocked him in drafts back and forth to each other in the roundabout neighborhood of the fourth, fifth, sixth rounds. And I think every time you and I were just like, yeah, they just need a big dude, like the big dude he was a BYU guy, right?
I think so.
I was like, yeah, they need somebody like the big dude from BYU. And like, I'm so glad when the Patriots sign guys that you and I like during draft seasons from years earlier, where we're like, yeah, we were right about that guy.
Well,
And
what was it?
hopefully we were right about Tonga.
And they've been looking for some, like, who was it? Was it McNeil who they signed?
Aleem McNeil.
There was a medical issue, so he didn't end up sticking. But he was another guy that we're just like,
yes, the dream is alive. Guy. And then like 2 days later, when he failed the physical, we're like, the dream is dead.
But yeah, like, what I love about this Tonga move is Godshaw was a guy who was overpaid. Now, he's a good player, but a player who honestly was probably playing more in the middle of that defense than he should have been given his skill set.
Yeah.
And, regardless of what Bill Belichick said about him being one of the best defensive linemen in the league, there were diminishing returns on the investment that they had made in him. So being able to get out from under that and then bring in a guy like Tonga, who is that classic, space eater, run stuffer for a fraction of the price. I mean, to me, especially when you have $120 million in cap space, you can eat the $6 million that in cap space for Godshaw and call it a day. And I think it was going to be more than that next year. And you've got a guy who maybe isn't quite as good, but he's a guy that you're hoping plays 25-30% of your snaps, and you're not sinking a huge amount of resources into it. So I think it was just a savvy kind of move. It was just like, all right, you know what, Devon, thanks for your time. I know you weren't thrilled with things. We're going to let you go and end up saving a bunch of money on the back end.
And not to mention they were able to send him home too. He's a good Louisiana boy, Devon Godshaw, and be able to kind of send him where he wants to go. Like, pretty good on the Patriots being able to do that. I keep thinking with Tonga of sort of like comps in my head for guys like that, of sort of that big space eater defensive tackle. And the guy I keep coming back to, maybe the guy I keep coming back to is a little bit more pedigree than Tonga, but I just keep thinking in my head of just how large of a human Danny Shelton was in the middle of that defensive line. And Shelton was less rotational than probably Tonga will be, but of just sort of that thought of big guy in the middle of the defense being just like, good luck moving this boulder of a human. And they've needed a guy like that who sort of does that. I never got the sense with Godshaw that Godshaw was sort of this imposing figure in the middle of that defense. And I wonder if that's just sort of scheme fit or just sort of the tumult between kind of the multiple regimes here while he was here as a Patriot. I don't know. I just feel like when I think of types like Tonga, I think of the Danny Shelton types of just oh, I'm in the middle of here. Good luck. Let me take your guard and center and try and push them on a little bit of a bumper car ride.
Yeah. I was just trying to look up to see if Lance Zierlein had given him a comp back when he was in the combine, but couldn't find it without looking too much. But I think that the Shelton thing is a good comp. I think that they also asked Danny Shelton to do a little bit more than maybe they should have. They were looking for more versatility than he could offer. But if they're just asking Tonga to do his thing, obvious running situations, then do your thing in obvious running situations.
Yeah.
All right. So
and it's good too that they keep just doing that. Defensive line needed so much help. And I think even getting a rotational piece like Tonga, when I saw that come across the wire, I was all right, great. They're actually going to address the trenches.
Yeah.
And not say that they're going to.
as much as I love Jeremiah Farms, asking that guy to take on a double team is just it's crazy. So there were a lot of problems with the makeup of the roster last year, even before the injuries, and the injuries just exacerbated everything. But
yeah,
I think that we've covered all of the defensive players. I haven't missed anybody, right?
You have not missed anybody to my recollection.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move over to offense, and we're going to start with the big get on offense, and that is quarterback Josh Dobbs, 2 years, $8 million, 3.8 guaranteed. You are super stoked about this, so I am going to let you go.
Okay, I say this as a kid who in the 7th grade got to go to space camp with Westfield Middle School South. That was the big 7th grade field trip. Josh Dobbs is also a fellow space camp kid like myself. To a point, his nickname, Chris, what is his nickname?
You tell me. This is I'm giving you the floor here.
Josh Dobbs, the pride of the University of Tennessee. His nickname is the Pastronaut. He has an aeronautics degree from the University of Tennessee. So, super smart guy, has played in a bunch of different places, played in Tennessee with Vrabel under that system, and has played for a million teams. Seems like he's a good dude. Like, they need a veteran backup, and I feel like Dobbs is that kind of veteran backup. Does this spell a trade for Joe Milton? I don't know. I don't want my Patriots to get rid of modern day Uncle Rico. I like having a quarterback who can throw that football over their mountains. I love that. But then again, now I've got a quarterback who can throw that football over their galaxies. That's right. Josh Dobbs has an arm that is intergalactic. Oh. But in all seriousness, I think they just needed a veteran to sort of be in that room to sort of kind of just be a good quality human on this roster. Like, I don't necessarily think that you're going to be able to see Josh Dobbs's contributions on the field throughout camp. But I think if he's there as sort of a backup quarterback vibes guy, great.
Yeah, I think that the 3.8 guaranteed, again, structure matters, but that guarantees that he's going to be on the roster at least for a year.
I agree.
Which makes me wonder what the plan is for our guy, the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
And hey, having in week 17 or week 18, excuse me, just doing what he does. And honestly, yes, it was against backups and special teamers. He was also throwing to backups and special teamers. I can see what they like about him. And it looked like a guy who had developed some polish a little bit too. I mean, we talked about him as, I believe the term that you used when we were talking about him during our pre-draft discussions was you called him a wild horse.
Yeah. Oh, he's a wild horse who could not be tamed
But honestly, I saw some poise. I saw, I mean, he still had, that moxie. He still had that, just that physical ability, but there were times when it was just like he stood in there, he made a good read, and he made a hell of a throw. I mean, so yes, it was last game of the season. People are still pissed they won that game. Whatever. To me, he especially with as down as some people seem to be about the quarterbacks in this draft, he's a commodity. So I don't think that you can look past that. And I think that that's where Dobbs gives you a little bit of flexibility. I'm not giving him away. I mean, if somebody offers me a top 100 pick for him, I consider that. Outside of that, I don't think I really do, because I think the benefit of him being on the roster, developing and having a good athletic backup quarterback is important, and maybe he'll be worth more later, if he continues to develop.
Yeah.
Josh Dobbs to me kind of feels like, he's the astronaut version of Brian Hoyer.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's Space
So
Camp Brian Hoyer.
it's fine. I think that people are getting a little off the deep end with like, oh, this means they're trading Joe Milton. Doesn't mean that they're trading him, but it does give them options. I'm not thrilled with the idea of, okay, now they've got to look in the draft for another young quarterback this year in a draft where quarterbacks aren't great. Like, towards the end of the draft, what are you looking at? Riley Leonard and
Curtis Rourke.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which are
Tyler Shug.
I mean, look, and as much of a project as Milton was, those guys are real projects. So I don't know.
I was just going to say, in this draft, Joe Milton gets drafted where? In this year's draft of quarterbacks, in this year's quarterback class, does he get drafted in the top 100?
They're playing up dart, so yeah.
And they're playing up Milrow.
Right. Yeah.
I think the guy who's like as I've got the NFL Network ticker, like the Bucky Brookses like top fives, and like Kyle McCord is in some of those top fives who's good. Yeah. Like, it's a weird quarterback. It's like that Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder quarterback class. I think those are the same. I think those guys are the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the top of the class is a little better than that.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the class overall, if you're grading on a curve,
sure.
then yeah,
sure.
That's a good comp. Okay, we spent way too much time on a potential third string quarterback. We are going to your boy, wide receiver Mac Hollins, 2 years, $8.4 million. Do you want to take the floor again on this one? I know that you that you waxed poetic a little bit earlier about him, but if you have more, I'm happy to hear it.
I kind of love the Mac Hollins signing. Again, quality human, kind of an interesting, weird, fun guy, but also a guy who has experience in a Josh McDaniels offense. His career year happened in Vegas with the Raiders under Josh McDaniels. He had a year, it was, 695 yards on like 60 catches, something like that. And last year in Buffalo, he was pretty good. He had just a pretty good year for the Buffalo Bills, be certainly a down the chart option. And I just think that I like the acquisition of Hollins, but what does this say about a guy that you and I both really love? And that's Kung Fu Kenny Kendrick Bourne. I feel like this sort of kind of starts to spell the end of a guy like KB.
So I think that there's something certainly to be said for the fact that they kind of have a logjam here on those mid-tier players. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You look
especially in that room.
Well, yeah, and you look at, so who are the guys who are guaranteed to be on this team? You're looking at Pop Douglas. You're looking at
Kayshon Boutte.
I mean, maybe. Just because he had a role last year doesn't necessarily mean that he has a role this year.
I'm putting him in. If we're counting on fingers, I'm putting him in.
Okay. You figure the guaranteed money probably puts Hollins in there, depending on the structure, of course.
From what I understand, it's an easy contract to move on from after year one.
After year one. So this year he's probably...
Yes.
Jalen Polk, does his status... Does his status, as a second round pick, does that guarantee him, a spot?
I think so. But who knows after August? Who knows?
Well, right. And so you've got a bunch of these guys who are none of these guys are Tuesday morning guys,
No.
And I mean, I don't think that there was necessarily one of those guys available in free agency, so I'm not saying anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the one thing that sets Mac Hollins apart from some of these guys, they don't have anybody else who's 6'4", 221.
No, they don't have a big
Like
guy.
he's the only guy that they have on this team who's a prototypical X. I mean, they had
Yeah.
Booty playing that last year, but that's because he was the closest thing that they had.
And he's what, 6 foot tall?
Booty, he might be 6'1".
6'1"?
You know.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've got the
Is
list up here.
while you're doing that,
He's 6 feet. Kendrick Bourne is 6'1".
Okay.
Javon Baker 6'1". You know, I would say Baker probably has more
downfield capability.
more of an athletic skill set. Probably has more go up and get it.
Mhm.
Even with the height differential, Mac Hollins just doesn't seem like that kind of player. But I mean, that's really they're not a bunch of midgets, but they don't have anybody who fits like that body type. Just looking at it, a cursory glance, So I think that he is someone who can stick, who has a role. He also has some special teams experience, so that adds to it. I think that. Yeah, I think that they used him in some interesting ways in Buffalo that that maybe you could take some notes on. I mean, he did he had something like 4 or 5 touchdowns and he caught 30 passes. So I mean, you had a team that was really devoid of red zone targets last year. Even like Hunter Henry, was not effective in the red zone as much as I love Hunter Henry. So if you've got a guy who can give you options, honestly, even just big bodies down in the red zone, that's something that helps. So, yes, he's the closest thing that they have to like the prototypical X. That's not me saying that they've got their number one receiver. No, I'm saying that he's a guy that's got a unique body type and skill set in the room
that they simply do not have right now. Right. I brought up Brandon Lloyd before, of a guy who had several hundred yards for a year with the Patriots.
Also a weird guy.
Kind of
1,000 yards one year. He had 1,000 yards for the Patriots,
did.
Didn't he?
No, it was like 875, I want to say. Or he was like just under 1,000.
Okay. I thought
guy.
He was a weird guy. I still love that picture of him diving to the end zone with the big smile on his face. It's just like, this guy just loves playing football.
Yeah. But are we mad about Mac Hollins if Mac Hollins' ceiling is Brandon LaFell?
No, I'm very happy about that.
I am too. Just good vibes guy and can put up numbers on the field. I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
I mean,
LaFell was no means a star,
player,
but like, yeah.
Yeah.
They still have work to do at wide receiver, but I'm sure we'll talk about where we think that will go. Right. Because we still have some more signings to talk about, or at least one.
I think the one more that we have is Austin Hooper for $7 million for a year, $7 million max for 1 year.
Wait, are we forgetting? Yeah, you're forgetting Morgan Moses.
Oh, you're right, because Morgan Moses was higher up on my list, and I skipped over him because I was just going through the through the defensive guys. So my apologies. We will go to Morgan Moses, who, to me, they basically guaranteed that they don't have to put Mike Onwenu at a right tackle.
Back at tackle, yeah.
Honestly, giving that guy some stability,
best thing for him.
Right. And now you're looking at that. You've got a couple of road graders on that right side of the line to run behind. I mean, it reminds, like, not who was it was next to Marcus Cannon for
Vollmer?
No, I'm talking about
No.
at guard. When Cannon was at right tackle, who was the guard? But it was the same kind of concept. You just had two guys who could move bodies in the run game. So you're shoring up, and I think that having the stability and being able to be like, okay, I'm a right guard is really going to help on you. You know, Moses is not. He's an adequate NFL starter, and that is what they need because they didn't have that. You had poor Trey Jacobs out there. You had Caden Wallace, who I don't think he was ever healthy.
No.
I was skeptical about him to begin with, and I'm giving him a pass because I don't think he ever got healthy. So hopefully he'll be able to do that and then kind of work his way into some kind of rotation. But basically,
are we forgetting Dan Connolly? Was the guy we were forgetting? Was it Dan Connolly?
That might be. Or was Connolly the center?
I don't know.
Not important, but
I'm looking at the 2014 roster, so.
But
if I come up with another name, I'm just going to shout it. Keep going.
They basically just got a couple of guys that on that right side who are just going to be people movers, you know? And that's the first step is you've shored up theoretically the right side of your line. And theoretically you'll be able to have a few more answers on the rest of the line. And then maybe you only have like one real question mark. And I mean, best case scenario, that question mark is left guard, you know? I think that Morgan Moses, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that he's spectacular. But he's an NFL ready starter who is going to solidify a position that was it was a revolving door, both in terms of, the number of players that you were cycling in there and the number of players going through there on the way to the quarterback. Like, I think I sent you something that was like a graph that showed, who was most responsible for the sacks and the percentage. The percentage was highest. Like, for all the problems that they had on the left side, right tackle was their highest problem from a percentage standpoint. So shoring that up, I think it certainly helps. You would have loved to have Ronnie Stanley on the other side too, but that just apparently was it was going to take something really special to pull him away from Baltimore, it seems. So they'll have to address that elsewhere.
Which is going to be interesting. So at left tackle, I just sort of wonder what they're going to do. I'll tell you, it was sort of making me dizzy and feeling like I was on crazy pills reading Greg Bedard's kind of weird Twitter crash out yesterday, kind of talking about, well, actually, Vidarian Lowe wasn't nearly as bad as you remember. Kind of comparing him to Cam Robinson. And I understand his point of just like the sheer numbers weren't quite what they are, but at the same point, like, you have this prized prospect at quarterback in Drake May. Shouldn't you have higher standards than Vidarian Lowe and Trey Jacobs? Like,
you should, but here's where Vidarian Lowe can work. Vidarian Lowe can work if you are solid at left guard and at center. If you have one problem area, you can scheme around it. You can find ways to help there. And on top of everything else, the guy at at left tackle trusts who's to his right there at left guard. And left guard was as much of a question mark as anything last year. You had maybe one position that you were just like, we have an NFL player here. I mean, at center, they were taking Ben Brown off the scrap heap, and God bless him, he did what he could.
Played pretty well.
But, it's one of those things where how much of Vidarian Lowe's struggles were resultant of, basically a house of cards that was tumbling. I'm not saying that I'm fitting him for a red jacket, but
no, me neither.
I see the point, that's being made, but other things have to happen for me to be okay with giving the Vidarian Lowe experience another try.
I agree. And I think this sort of brings a question to my head. Just you saying all of that. Does this mean, right this very second, the most important man on this offensive line as we speak right now here on March 12th, is that man not Cole Strange? And sort of wherever he slots in, whether it's at center or at left guard?
Well, I would say from that perspective, it's probably David Andrews. If David Andrews is healthy and decides not to retire, that answers a bit of the question as to where Cole Strange might go. So, yeah, and I mean, and Cole Strange in and of himself is a question mark. He's been a fine player. We can,
when healthy,
taking out the where he was drafted, just looking at him objectively as a football player, he is a fine, somewhat undersized guard who's athletic, but can sometimes get bullied by bigger, stronger guys. You're going to find warts with most non-Pro Bowl, tackles, guards, whatever. So the question has always been availability, and you gotta wonder with the nicks that he's had, and then like a pretty serious injury that he came back from last year, and you can question whether or not he was completely back up to full health when he came back in. It's another question. So I think that it would be hard to say, oh yeah, we're gonna, he's either going to be at left guard or he's going to be at center. I thought that he acquitted himself fine at center. I mean, I can't say that I'm an expert at center, but
neither am I.
There was never a time really where I was just like,
oh, he sucks.
Oh, no.
Yeah, no.
So I mean, he's the big knock that I've heard about him at center is he's too tall. I mean,
okay,
but if he can still get that squat and get down, then it doesn't really matter as much. But yeah, I would say honestly, it starts from the inside. It works out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, still a lot of questions on the line. More questions, I think, on the line than they at least have. You can question where Jalen Polk and Javon Baker are in terms of their development.
Totally.
But they do have professional receivers in the room. No, I'm not going to say that they've got great talent, but I mean,
guys who have been there, who've been around.
They've got, and some guys who have been productive, like before he tore his ACL, Kendrick Bourne was on his way to 1,000-yard season for a pitiful offense. Mac Hollins has had a little bit of success in this league. When he's been able to get in space, Pop Douglas has shown a thing or two. So you have some guys who are NFL players, It's not like they're going and getting Clifford Franklin out of the Quickie Mart,
How dare you? He is a one man Cole. Only man catching it, only man coming down with it. R.I.P. Gene Hackman.
Indeed.
Do we want to talk Austin Hooper, or do we want to move
we can just quickly Austin Hooper. Given that they've said that this is a $7 million max deal, I don't think that he's guaranteed a spot on the roster.
Totally.
But I think that he was a guy who produced when called upon. He certainly seemed to have a rapport with Drake May, and I think that that's important. He's a guy who can be a solid contributor. So again, don't think that precludes them from making another move. I don't know who the other free agent tight ends are out there, but if you've got a guy who likes being here, likes the quarterback, and and was somewhat productive, I don't see why you necessarily look somewhere else in that market unless somebody who you're really enthralled with springs free. I think that they could still address that, in the draft if they choose to, to kind of develop somebody maybe even behind him, because we know that a lot of times these tight ends take a little bit of time in the league.
Yeah, they're not all Rob Gronkowski, Tony Gonzalez that right out the gate, they're really good. I wonder if at that 38 selection, they look at some of the tight ends sort of at the top of that second round, whether it's a Harold Fannin or Mason Taylor or Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, sort of around that neighborhood of picks as we've certainly talked about and as we've mocked back and forth to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm becoming more and more. We'll just slide right into some of the draft talk right now. I've become really enamored with the idea of Higgins out of Iowa State at that 38.
He's the dude,
especially after his testing. I mean, you saw the physical skills, but he kind of, he moved. I mean, he was faster than
he thought
I anticipated that he would be. And he is another one. He's one of those bigger bodied guys that they don't have. And if you have that, it kind of, again, like we were talking about with corner, it slides everything back down. Now, mind you, if they end up going another, I think that the second, third round is a good sweet spot for wide receivers in this draft. And I think it's getting more towards second because so many of them tested so well at the combine. But I'm also not sneezing at a Restrepo, who has a completely different kind of skill set, but is one of those. He's dynamic in a different kind of way. He reminds me a lot of. It's not a perfect comparison again, but I feel a lot about him the way I felt about Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Small guy, speed.
But also stronger and tougher
speed.
than...
Yeah. Keep going, but stronger and tougher, yeah.
Stronger and tougher than you'd expect for somebody that size,
I agree.
So, but in terms of what we've seen so far, and granted, there's a lot more to come before the NFL draft. There's still potential trades to be made. There are guys who, could break free. Given what you've seen so far, does this change your outlook at all as to where they go with that first pick?
No. I think unless they sign like a Tyron Smith or a Cam Robinson that sort of is the left tackle, I think they're taking a tackle in their first 3 picks. They're going to. I don't know that they take Will Campbell at 4. I mean, yeah, his athletic scoring was really good for a tackle, but there's some size things there. The arm length thing is weird and dumb and doesn't make sense. I made a joke about it earlier to Annie before about trying to reach over a table and open a window that I couldn't do. I felt like I had Will Campbell arms. But I just, I certainly do, I can tell you this right now. They are not taking Mason Graham at 4. I don't think they take Mason Graham at 4. I think the Milton Williams signing certainly precludes them from doing that. Unless they get a health report on Christian Barmore that pretty much ends the guy's career. That's, I think, the only thing that I see them taking Mason Graham at 4. I think they'd be happy with Travis Hunter falling to them at 4. I don't think Hunter gets there. I think they would sprint the card up if Abdul Carter is there at 4. And then that they've got their other edge guy on the other side of Landry. But I don't know that Carter's going to be there. I think Tennessee would be foolish to pass on a guy like that. Who cares that they don't have a quarterback? They could punt on this year and take, whoever's at the top of next year's draft, whether it's Carson Beck or it's Arch Manning it's... I mean, I don't know that Arch leaves after 1 year, though. I don't. His uncles certainly didn't. They didn't. And that's sort of kind of the only comp that
And
you can kind of
there's
give.
less incentive to come out early now with the NIL
Totally.
money being what it is.
Totally. I wonder though if like Tennessee is sort of looking at Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders and being like, no, we'll take the defensive end that's going to be, the next Javon Curse for us.
Mm-hmm.
They have that institutional knowledge of a guy like Curse being just like, all right, we can live with that. That's fine. And I just wonder that like the team that I don't know what the hell they're going to do is the New York Giants at 3. Do the Giants let Travis Hunter get by them? I don't know. Do the Giants take Shedeur Sanders? I certainly don't. After hearing all the things that I'd heard kind of through Twitter and sort of through the NFL grapevine of how those interviews at the Combine went for Shedeur Sanders, he's the biggest wild card. Would it shock you if there's a Brady Quinn-like slide for Shedeur Sanders in this year's draft?
No, I wouldn't necessarily call it a Brady Quinn-like slide either, because Brady Quinn was pretty much, consensus as a high pick, and I think that there's a lot more volatility with Sanders going in. So
I agree.
But no, I don't think that that it would be much of a surprise at all if he had a Will Levis slide.
Geno Smith slide.
Geno Smith slide. Yeah, there's a good
one. I just wonder. It's a weird class. It's a weird class. Like the high end offensive talent isn't necessarily first round talent. Like you and I haven't really talked about a guy who certain factions of Patriots Twitter is enamored with, and that's Tet McMillan. I feel like Tet McMillan at 4, I feel like there are certain pockets of Patriots Twitter who think that that's exactly the magic elixir that the Patriots wide receiver room needs. But then I feel like there are people who kind of are gun shy of a first round wide receiver contested catch guy with that kind of size after the N'Keal Harry experience kind of blew up in everybody's faces.
Yeah.
It's drafting at 4 with the needs that you have are very weird. They haven't addressed left tackle and they haven't addressed wide receiver yet. I just wonder if they can get away with doing BPA at 4 when those are 2 fairly sizable needs.
So I think that I'm making the assumption that in some order, one of the quarterbacks, probably not Shedeur, Hunter and Carter are off the board.
Mm-hmm.
I still think that they go tackle. I think that they go with T-Rex arms. The thing it's funny to joke about and everything like that, but there are a couple of things. First off, everybody was measuring short at the Combine.
Yeah,
everybody was. Which raises a question as to, who's doing the measuring, how were they doing the measuring versus how somebody else would do the measuring.
Pro days will be important for this.
I don't think whoever was doing the testing or doing the measuring did a lot of guys very many favors.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I'd be a lot more worried about that if Will Campbell didn't play in the conference he played in and performed in that conference the way that he did, if he wasn't the freak athlete that he is. I think that's a lot easier to make up for that length when you are as savvy as he is, you have the mindset that he has, and you have the athletic abilities that he has. So, and it's one of those. Now, one thing that we all have to get used to and wrap our heads around is like, well, this guy wouldn't be a 4 in last year's draft. This isn't last year's draft. This is this year's draft. You got to take a guy. Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, in terms of their need and what I'd want, like I've said, the receiver is the
cherry on top.
Exactly. It's the hood ornament. You know, it's the performance part on the car that you've just rebuilt. You know, so I think that it's not necessarily drafting for need; it's drafting the best player available at a spot that makes sense for you. That's a spot that makes sense for them.
Yeah.
I mean, if they were to say, "Yeah, we're taking Ted McMillan," I'd be like, "Okay." I'm not going to be mad about it because
me neither.
Again, like the comps that I've heard for him is Drake London. It's just like, okay, that's a good player. That's a player that I think you could, you pair him up with Drake May. There's something there.
Yeah.
It's just so many times even if you have like you hit on the on the wide receiver early in the draft, has it helped you win any more games? Like, how many games did Malik Neighbors win for,
the Giants? Yeah.
Like, how many wins has Garrett Wilson gotten for the Jets? So like that's the thing that I always come back to.
For the Saints, yeah.
Right. I mean, Olave, injuries
Health
were a big
wise
part of his thing, but but that's a concern for me. Like, it's one of those things that's just like, if they take him, he may be a very good player, and I'm not going to say that he's not. It's just more looking at, how history has smiled upon teams, especially teams that are in the position that the Patriots are in. And, I think that building, and I think that Vrabel shares this, it's just like you build from the trenches and then build out,
Yeah, I agree.
It's like, so I think that would be the pick. They could also go with his name's escaping me, the edge.
From which school?
Is it A&M?
Shamar Stewart.
Thank you.
Nick Scorton. I think it's Stewart.
No, Stewart.
Who's a freak athlete.
He is. He's somebody that is like that's a pick that you're taking for that you're projecting out what he could be. It's a bit more of a reach. Quote unquote reach, like when you're saying reach, you're comparing it to other drafts, and that doesn't necessarily make a lot of, but that's a guy who's a little bit more raw. And of course, then you pair him with a veteran like Harold Landry, and you see what happens, and that kind of thing. So there are other ways that they can go with that first pick, but I still think it's going to be tackle. I just do. Like, deep down, unless something crazy happens and somebody really wants 4.
Like, if somebody really wants Ashton Genty or McMillan, or somebody really wants Campbell.
Hell, yeah, if somebody really wants Campbell, then go for it. He's not like, I have to have this guy. He's just in this draft based on what I think is going to be available to them. He's the one that makes the most sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's a lot of potential in, and all of them have warts, but if you want to address receiver with a second or third round pick, you have assets, or who knows, there may be a guy that you really like who's still sitting there at the end of the first round. You have the assets that you can move back up and maybe try to address it that way. So I think that there's a way to address both, but I'll also understand that they're magic beans. They're all magic beans. So it's not a guarantee that you do this and it's all going to be gravy.
Yeah. Like, I wonder if like Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka or Matthew Golden are sitting there at the end of the first round if the Patriots aren't like, screw it. We've got 38. We've got a third rounder that we got for Matthew Judon. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Like, those are the kinds of guys that or if they do address receiver at 4 and say like Ariante Ursary or Josh Simmons or somebody's sitting there at the end of the first, you go up and get that guy.
Right.
They have options. Like, I think free agency, what they've done this week has given them options. They're not necessarily guaranteed to do one thing at 4 or with all of their other picks.
All right. So we, of course, have gone long because we always do. But so if there was one player, whether it's in the draft or who's out there in free agency or maybe a trade. If there's one wish list player, do you have one?
Okay. I'll give you a free agent now that he's on the free agent wire is Cooper Kupp. They need experience in that wide receiver room, and a Super Bowl MVP is pretty good to add to your room. And then in the draft, guys that I love in this draft that like I've mocked a ton and have brought to the Patriots that maybe aren't necessarily like big names, but I feel like guys who would fit at least what we would want to do and could be a good moldable ball of clay. That's Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College. Bring another big tackle. He's played on the right side, but also at the same point, you need as much talent depth as at tackle as you can, and you can address it later on in the draft. I look at he and Anthony Belton from North Carolina State very similarly in the draft as sort of guys that you can get sort of later that you don't have to worry about. So I would say those would be kind of the two for both plateaus. Do you have any that you want to kind of end with?
So the one guy who I would just be like, if there was a way to do this, and I don't see how it would have to be worth their while because I don't think that there's a great incentive just to get rid of him. But I would love to have Jacoby Myers back. You talk about one of those guys who's a professional in the room. I mean, he's had look, he was a professional here. He was productive here. He went to what ended up being a mess of a situation in
Vegas.
I almost said Oakland. And like last year with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell throwing him the ball, he had 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. The year before that, he scored 8 touchdowns. He scored like 1 touchdown when it was the entire time he was with the Patriots. Then he went to Vegas and just couldn't stop scoring. But he's another one of those guys that he offers some versatility. He's a guy who, has some familiarity with, what Josh McDaniels wants to do with an offense. And he's just a guy who gets open and catches the football. He's what I thought, because I wasn't thrilled. I didn't hate, but I also wasn't jumping out of my seat for the Jalen Polk pick. But I thought Jalen Polk would be basically, like if we're
Myers
being
2.0.
realistic with the expectation, he would be Jacoby Myers. Reliable hands, move the chains, maybe score you a few touchdowns. And that would be solid. That would be better than they had, from a Patriots wide receiver draft pick in some time. But, I think you'd have to really sweeten the dog just woke up. You'd have to you'd have to really sweeten the pot to get them to bite on that. And then is the value worth it, So that would be my guy, and I've always had a thing. You and I were on the Jacoby Myers hype train when it was first pulling out of the station. I mean, you and I were the ones who were shoveling coal into the furnace, to get that train rolling.
Choo choo.
So I would love to have him back. And it's again, he's that veteran. He's been there. He's been productive, and I think that he's a guy who's got that character that young players would listen to. So
great. Anybody in the draft that you can think of?
I mean, outside the guys that I've kind of mentioned, like I'm really in love with Higgins right now. Restrepo's a guy that I, either one of those guys, if they went with in the draft, would be, would be great picks as far as I'm concerned. I'm trying to think of somebody later in the draft, and there are a couple names I thought of earlier, but now I'm drawing a blank. So we've been at this for over an hour and a half. So I think that this is the sign that my brain's starting to melt.
Yes. It might be time to sign off.
Well, thanks again. It's always a great discussion, always an enlightening discussion. I think that between your recall, like your ability to just pick names out of the sky, that I'm just like, how the hell did you remember that? I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I love, every time I think I walk away, I'm just like, man, that was a really great discussion, and I know that later tonight I'm going to be like, I should have mentioned that, but we'll save that for our either our pre NFL draft rundown, which will not be 4 hours this time.
No, we're not going to do that again. Our
Or-
wives will hate us for that, probably. We did that last one, and Annie was like, "You talked about NFL draftees for 4 hours." I was like, "Yeah, I mean, we took breaks.
Yeah.
We had to get beers out of the fridge. We had to, we had to take care of some things." But yeah, we are committing right now, listeners, friends of the pod, we are not going to do 4 hours. We're not doing it. Don't make us do it.
Yeah.
We won't do it.
No. I mean, if you request it, we're just going to have to politely decline, and then just carry that guilt with us for the rest of our lives. So please do not put that burden on us.
It will be Lenten repentance for us both.
All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Greg. We'll see what happens, and we'll probably be talking on the pod again in about a month, right?
About a month.
Do a little preview before the draft.
Yeah, sounds good.
Not a big preview, little preview.
No, I've already started to bank some fun Gary Brown-esque names in my head. I'm doing that work too.
Excellent. That's God's work right there.
Sure is.
All right, bud. Thanks a lot.
See you, buddy. Bye.
Well, hey, thank you to everybody who has listened to this episode. I know, once again, Greg and I went long. I warned you that we would, but there was a lot of exciting stuff to get through. Obviously, the New England Patriots seem to be putting themselves on a path to getting back to some relevance, to some respectability, and we had a lot to kind of weed through. Obviously, some things may have changed in between the time we recorded this on Wednesday to when you're listening to it now, but I think generally it's a pretty good look at the first steps that they've taken in getting back to that road to recovery, basically. Also, loved the news that we had about Disney. I hope that you go and take a look at some of these things. Some of these videos are really cool. I really recommend going and listening to that We Call It Imagineering episode that I was talking about. Man, that one really, that entire series is pretty great, but that one especially was just really cool. So what else is really cool is how much you guys have supported this podcast, whether you are leaving reviews or ratings on your favorite podcatcher, whether it's 5 stars or thumbs up or whatever it is on the podcatcher you're using, whether you're interacting with our social media. That's Maza's Musings Podcast on Facebook. We've also got Maza's Musings Pod at Instagram and Threads. And what's the other one? Oh, it's X/Twitter or whatever you want to call it. We're also on Blue Sky, so you can find us there. And we're doing some stuff with TikTok. That is Maza's Musings Podcast. You can find us there. Thank you to everybody who has been interacting with that as well. If you're looking for that and you're looking for more information about the podcast, maybe some past episodes, you can also go to our website, which is mazasmusings.wordpress.com. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. We'll give you information on upcoming episodes, past episodes. If there are cool contests or anything like that, you can join that too. Also, in this week's newsletter, there is a link to join the Maza's Madness NCAA men's basketball bracket. So if you're into that, join us. We'll have some fun. The winner will get some kind of fabulous prize. Well, it might be fabulous. It might just be a prize, but either way, you'll get something for winning. And if you don't win, you can still have some fun with us. Just another way we're trying to interact with people. So, as always, thank you for all of the support. If you're looking to do a little bit of extra support, you can always buy us a blue milk. Also on the website, you can find a link to that, and it's basically just a small, obligation-free way to support this podcast and some of the, small costs that go into putting this whole thing together. Whether you decide that that's how you're going to support us, or you're going to go another route and just share us on social media, or just the reviews and everything like that, whatever it is, much appreciated. It's all good. And as always, hey, everyone, I hope you have a great weekend and a great week.